Anyone who knows me knows I have military stories for days. I served for 3 years, did not serve in the States, so my stories aren't flashy. I did not go around shooting people halfway across the world in the name of democracy. I'd say compared to the American soldier service, mine was tame. If you consider encountering people who want to turn you into a shish kebab before they chuck you out of a window day in and day out tame. Speaking of, the shish kebab thing happened to some poor reservist 20 years ago. I had to deal with those people every single day. Granted, nothing happened to me because I was taught how to diffuse an escalating situation that could be diffused. Here we value the lives of humans, even those who hate us for no reason beyond indoctrination drilled into them. This story is different. This story is a little more mundane and far more bizarre than someone just getting shot or blown to pieces. I'm sure people have this idea in their heads, war is hell because so many people die. That's a misconception. War is worse than hell because innocent people get dragged into it. War is worse than hell because people learn to stop seeing other people in front of them. They see mobile targets. It becomes a situation of kill or be killed, and it weighs down on everyone involved, as long as we are not talking about psychopaths. No one wins in wars. Everyone loses. Some lose less, some lose more. If you ask a person with military-related post-traumatic stress disorder what broke them, chances are they'll tell you it wasn't a single event. Granted, there are cases of people who have seen something so fucking awful. This one single event is enough to torture them 40 and 50 years later, but these are probably the rarer cases. Like this one former military medic who saw his brigadier get blown up. The guy, some 40 years later, still remembers the sight of the exposed spine and gore of his commanding officer who told him to remove the rocks from under his back. These weren't rocks. These were the bandages that the medic placed on his commander's exposed insides. The poor man still hates walking on sand because it reminds him of these haunting last words of his commander. What breaks people is going from 0 to 300 miles per hour in a matter of 0.5 seconds. The stress kills. The stress of military life leads people into depression and suicide too. Even without the hazing and whatnot, here, especially now, it's fairly harmless. Younger soldiers will not get the best beds, will have the dirtier duties, and will be called military jargon names which are meant to symbolize their lack of experience. Beatings and violence are not so much a thing anymore. The stress drives people insane. The lack of sleep, the physical strain, the need to jump from duty to duty due to manpower shortages, the strict regiment, the shitty food, the awful living condition. All of that leads to a build-up of stress that can and will lead young men and women towards the abyss. Anyway, a few months before my discharge, I was stationed at a military camp called Anatot, aptly named after a war goddess. The naming was unintentional, in eastern Jerusalem. Due to the length of my tenure, I was used as a reserve soldier in my unit, meaning I did not have to do shit until someone was out of commission for whatever reason. I spent a few weekends being part of the security of the camp. Being the only combatant of this unit, I was placed in the most volatile section of the camp, a watchtower overlooking the nearby village. As much as the local soldiers played it up as this potentially combustible section of the camp, it was beyond quiet. It was quite frankly boring. In other words, I was getting to rest on duty. The shifts were relatively short, just 4 hours on duty, then 8 hours of rest, and 4 additional hours of duty from Thursday afternoon until Sunday morning. Simple, easy, refreshing. The officer in charge of camp security would pop up every now and again to check on me, and that is about it. I would spend my hours there doing nothing but kicking my feet up on a stool. and keeping an eye on the nothing unfolding ahead of me. One weekend, I went sick on duty. Feeling a bit under the weather, I got my hands on paracetamol and did my thing. The night shift rolled by, and I was driven to my watchtower, which is quite the distance from the barracks. I spent the night doing the usual nothing until at about 1 a.m. I saw someone walking around on the road ahead. Now, someone walking on this road usually wasn't strange. It was a rather sparsely used road, so the populace frequently walked on it. What was strange is that this person was walking around in the dead of night. Nobody seemed to walk there during the nights. The road was mostly empty during the night time. You'd get a few cars to pass by, but that is about it. I looked at that person for a few seconds before noticing that they were walking kind of strangely. Pacing only, almost stumbling, swaying side to side. What I noticed to be even stranger is that person was walking in a sort of circle, back and forth, almost like they were unsure of what to do. That's what we would call suspicious behavior. So I kept my eyes locked on that strange person, who at first seemed drunk to me. I have already had encounters with drunk people going where they should not. Such a case would not have been surprising. My throat had itched, so I reached down to my bottle and gulped down some water. I took my eyes away from this person for about a second as I drank. Once I returned my gaze back to him, he was sporting a rifle. My brain went from 0 to 300 immediately. The first thing I did was load my gun. At that moment, me missing a very obvious rifle at first did not even seem like a strange detail. I did not even think about how odd it was that a rifle suddenly appeared slung over this person's shoulder. As I switched off the safety and readied myself for this bastard to try to charge the fence, contacting command over the radio, I made sure to keep my eyes on them. After some back and forth with the guys in the war room, I was told to start the suspect arrest protocol. That is what we do here when we are trying to arrest someone whom we might suspect as a dangerous individual to civilians or military personnel. You shout at your target to stop. Warn it you will shoot a few times before actually shooting. If they become a clear and immediate danger to you or anyone else, you are free to shoot them to incapacitate. Shoot the legs. If they become a danger to someone's life in that same moment, you are free to shoot at the center of bodily mass. If they stop, you do not shoot them. You just arrest them, using only the necessary force in reaction to their own behavior. I went over the protocol, and this person just ignored me. I could not shoot them either because while they had a rifle, it was just slung over their shoulder. The figure was not even looking at me. It was just stumbling around aimlessly. For that reason, I could not shoot it. We value life over here unlike other places. Now, that is a thing people do not talk about. Not everyone has the guns to commit a murder or become a guerrilla martyr. Maybe people get cold feet once they are faced with the armed forces. The person below just stopped at one point and stood there for a few moments. These few moments seemed to last longer than they actually were. Then the person started walking off to the south. Making sure I kept my eyes locked on this person, I notified command that they were going to the south, and I am keeping a watch over him as they move. I kept myself glued to the silhouette until it disappeared in the darkness of the night. 10 minutes later, an officer arrived in a hammer and questioned me. I told him about the ordeal in detail, and he asked me to stay alert before returning to his hammer and driving off. The radio went nuts with everyone trying to spot this mysterious figure. The lookouts saw someone moving along the perimeter of the camp. Forces were called in to patrol, and if possible, apprehend the armed individual. I listened to the radio attentively as the situation kept unfolding. I started hearing a strange humming at around 1:30 o'clock. I assumed it was coming from the radio, as our equipment was old and clearly had many issues. The noise kept getting louder and louder until it became irritating. I smacked the radio out of frustration, and a hoarse, almost voiceless, pained scream echoed from beneath me. It came from beneath the watchtower. It was long and shrill, almost like nails digging across a board. My body tensed up, and my reason shut down. The brain went on autopilot. There were no questions to ask. Someone was crossing every line they could, and I was going to put a stop to that. I violently opened the door of the watchtower. The scream from below died down. I positioned my rifle in clear view of whoever might have been below me, just in case. Nothing happened. I yelled out, but there was no response. The adrenaline kept on leading the way. I stomped my way down the stairs leading to the top of the tower and looked around, scanning the area as carefully as I could. I was alone. My mind must have been playing tricks on me. My illness and the stress of the previous hour must have been taking their toll. Once I realized I was alone, I started calming down. The flow of adrenaline stopped, and I was starting to feel the usual aches and pains that had been bothering me for the past few months. My head was starting to spin a little. Looking at my watch, I was glad my shift was about to end in a few minutes. I did not plan on telling anyone about the incident for two reasons. People would think I am insane, and because I breached protocol and left the tower unattended. I climbed back up to the tower and slumped against the door, clutching at my rifle. My head was turning really light. I was almost flying. Chills rocked me. I was spacing out badly. A loud, hoarse, shrill scream blasted straight through me. I felt myself shudder violently in place as my heartbeat rocketed once more. The scream was unbearably close, painfully so. My head instinctively turned towards the source of the scream. The tower shook for a second, and I felt a blunt, pulsating pain originating at the back of my head. My stomach turned, and I felt myself going out. Another scream echoed through my form, as I realized what was the source of these awful vocalizations. A pallid man dressed in a military uniform was trying to claw his way into the tower through the window. His eyes pure white, teeth yellow with shades of caramel brown. Blood covered his face and uniform, blood coming from a massive opening at the top of his head. Bits of his brain were leaking from his skull. That is the last thing I remember, before waking up in the infirmary a couple of hours later. Apparently, I was burning with a high fever. The guy replacing me found me passed out lying in the middle of the tower, sweating bullets through my uniform. I had the flu, and spent the following few days rolling around in bed, not leaving the barracks. I did not bother telling anyone about the ghastly wailing soldier, assuming it was just a fever hallucination or dream. The rifle-carrying individual was not found either. The assumption was that they had been gripped with fear at the last moment and just left because the lookouts had spotted something too. The key word was something. It was a movement they could not really make out. Not that it mattered. I almost forgot about my feverish experience until one guy I was serving with told a local military legend of sorts. Everyone considers this a legend because nobody has the precise details about the events. Just a bullshit story that servicemen tell newcomers about a soldier who had decided to take his own life in the same watchtower I was stationed at. Apparently, said soldier decided shooting himself was going to be too loud, and he did not want that kind of attention. So, he opted to take his own life by throwing himself through the tower's window. The hair on the back of my head stood when I heard the ending of this legend. Apparently, the suicidal soldier's head hit the legs of the tower before crashing down on the rocks below. This resulted in his skull being cracked open like a watermelon. Someone else chimed in and said his face was contorted into a pained grimace. The guy telling the tale corrected his friend and said they actually found the soldier's body with his mouth twisted into a scream. Most scary stories feature some kind of dramatic event or a monstrous encounter. Some may feature an encounter with a violent criminal or a heart-seizing near-death experience. Mine is different from all of those. My scary story is entirely comprised of nothing but a mundane trip to the catacombs located underneath my hometown. The scariest thing that has ever happened to me was not life-threatening or even dangerous. I'm pretty sure that the things that keep me up at night aren't some inhuman creature or a traumatic event. No. The things that haunts my nightmares are the emptiness beyond the vacuum of space and an awful vision of something people shouldn't witness. What terrifies me the most in this life has no explanation. It has no reason or rhyme. It has no point to it. My story begins with me descending to the aforementioned catacombs for a typical walk. I've roamed around these underground streets for dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of times. For as long as I can remember, I've been around some part of the city under my town. These catacombs are mostly concrete walls with some sewage pipes running through them. There is nothing inherently scary about those halls. The concrete walls do not produce monsters that attempt to tear the skin out of the unfortunate fool that veers into their subterranean lairs. While the catacombs are fairly dark, a typical flashlight is usually enough to illuminate a safe path for those who wish to traverse the chthonic passages. That's how my evening started. I've descended into the nether realm that serves as the foundation upon which my hometown stands. I aimlessly walked around the endless halls, unbothered by anything external. My flashlight acted as my guide across the vast space ahead of me. I guess I took a turn I'd never taken before at some point. That's how I managed to get myself into a part of the catacombs I'd never seen before. The halls looked the same as they did everywhere else. There was something about them, however, something different. There was a soft humming sound coming from somewhere in that part of the catacombs. The sound was pleasant, and I felt a little compelled to follow its trail deeper into the underground city. My curiosity was piqued, somewhat, since the whole place was usually deathly quiet. I was intrigued to find the source of the humming sound. Thus, I made my way towards what I felt was the source of the noise. I walked for a bit before being stopped in my tracks by a drop of cold water hitting the top of my head. I remember looking up and seeing a leaking tube. I paid it no mind and pressed on, deeper into the unknown. The longer I went, the louder the humming had become. In no time the humming seemed fairly close. I thought I had figured out where the humming came from. I decided to press on to find the source of the sound. I picked up my pace before stopping dead in my tracks once more, once a drop of water landed on my head. Looking up, I've noticed another leaking pipe above me. Nothing of this one much. I pressed on. I walked for what must have been a few minutes, and while the humming had gotten closer and definitely louder, I couldn't locate the source. By that point, the humming had turned almost unbearable. It was hurting my ears. I've given up on finding the source of the hum and decided to head back home. I took what must have been 3 steps before feeling a drop of water land on my head. I looked up, and I saw a leaking tube. Something felt wrong. I mused the possibility of walking in circles, but quickly gave up on that thought. It couldn't have been the case. I was walking in a straight line the whole time. The pipes around this part of town must have been in dire need of repair. I decided to keep on walking back home. Then another drop of water landed on top of me. Shivers ran down my spine. I looked up and there was no leakage. I felt it, however, the drop of water land on my head. I ignored it and decided to pick up my pace, reasoning I was getting tired. It was night-time after all. Not a minute later, another drop of water fell on me. Shivers ran across my skin again. My heartbeat started rising. I was getting worried. I didn't even know why. Instinctively, I picked up my pace to a jog. I ran for a bit and then another drop of water, and another, and another, and another landed on my body. Every few meters, a drop of water would land on top of my head, sending searing shivers through my skin. I don't even know why. With each time, my heartbeat grew faster, and my breathing became more labored. The longer I ran, the more frequent the drops of water had become. Eventually, I felt like I was running in the rain. My heartbeat had skyrocketed by that point, and my vision had become narrowed to a point where I could barely notice what was ahead of me. The room seemed to grow hot with each passing moment. I felt the sweat make its way across my body. Each breath I took in felt like I was inhaling acidic fumes that would surely corrode my lungs in no time. The sound of water tapping was everywhere. I think I had gotten myself soaked by that point. I didn't care, though. I wanted to get out and go home. I don't know why I didn't scream or call anyone or anything. I guess I was too caught up in the weirdness of it all. The space all around me started spinning soon enough, and I felt as if I was starting to get tired. My movements became sluggish and hard. My legs turned heavy, like I was becoming slowly encased in concrete. The thought of getting stuck in some unknown substance in these catacombs sent my mind reeling. I focused on pushing through whatever was holding me back mindlessly. Thankfully, a dry, pained moan shook me awake out of my self-induced trance. I felt like I was electrocuted when I felt it. My body jolted and everything shook, twisting and turning for a second before turning still. A cold, wet substance caressed my body. The heat wore off and the heaviness of my body started dissipating. My head felt light and the light of my flashlight turned a little dim. I didn't have a care in the world for a second. I was floating in the vast cosmos and letting myself drown in a sea of dopamine that was flooding my nervous system. My chest felt heavy, and everything started spinning beautifully all around me, the light of my flashlight bursting into a beautiful circular dance above my head. I was losing the feeling of my limbs. My body felt so light for a moment, like it wasn't even there. The feeling of weightlessness felt delightful. I was losing myself in some sort of unearthly pleasure. That is, until something violently shook me, forcing me to open my eyes. Something was a pale girl, paler than any human has the right to be. She was so pale I could trace all of her veins as they ran beneath her skin. She was screaming at me while shaking my body as hard as she could. The girl's eyes. They caught my attention, sapping all of that pleasure away and turning it into fear. Her eyes, they were so misted. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears as my blood raced through my arteries. Pins and needles ran across my body, and she pushed me above the surface of the water. I heaved and thrashed once I realized I nearly drowned. I took the deepest breaths I have ever had. I didn't care about the air smelled and tasted like sewage waste. My body screamed at me to breathe. I just floated there, taking up as much air as I could. I was confused and disorientated. I had no clue how I got into that water. On top of that, the insides of my skull were starting to pound like I was struck with a hammer. 30 seconds, a minute and a half, 2 minutes, no one came up. The girl didn't come up. Not thinking, I dove under the water again. Looking around, there was nothing there. Nothing, only muddy water. My heart sank. and I pulled myself back up above the surface of the sea of waste. There was no girl. I was alone. I heard that dry, pained moan again coming from behind me, shivers running down my soaked back. I turned around, shining my flashlight at whatever was behind me. The light. It went nowhere. It just got sucked up into nothing, a form of pure pitch blackness, a complete nothing. A black hole stood in front of me. Every cell within my body started to dread, slowly built its way up my nervous system. I simply floated there, frozen in space as that thing. That absolute darkness floated in front of me. I couldn't do anything other than simply stare. The black hole seemed to have the water curved around it into the form of a hooded figure. The sight was ingrained into my brain. I think the black hole was moving towards me as the light rays seemed to grow shorter with the passing moments. I didn't stare at it for too long, but I definitely saw it getting closer. Once it was about a couple of inches away from me. Something tugged at my back, startling me even more, causing me to lose my balance and sink underwater. Once I resurfaced, gasping for air once more and shaking like crazy. I looked around, but there was nothing there. I was alone again. The black hole had vanished. The light seemed to travel across the hall as I shone the flashlight all over the space. As I was finally gathering myself, something screeched in my ear. I didn't even have to turn. I just swam as fast as I could. I needed to get out. The further I went, the louder the screeching had turned. I couldn't stop, and I couldn't turn away. Whatever was behind was awful. I knew it. I knew it deep down. Though I knew that if I'd slow down, I'd be done for. So I swam, and then I ran, and I didn't stop until I got home. I nearly concussed myself on my porch when I got home. I was so relieved the awful experience had ended, I neglected to notice my footing had gone awry. I couldn't sleep that night. All I could think about was the catacombs. I can't wrap my head around that experience to this day. I have no idea what happened and how it all turned out. I don't even know what I've seen there. I'm still clueless about how I lost my way or how I ended up in a pool of watery waste and what I've seen. I don't even know what the girl was. Thinking about her makes my skin crawl. As for the black hole thing, I couldn't get the visual of that all-consuming black mass out of my head. It kept plaguing my mind over and over. It ended up driving me to a point where I had to get wasted to be able to shake it out of my mind. Get it out of my mind for a short time, that is. I ended up drawing the body of pure darkness as I witnessed it. An empty mass covered in a peculiarly shaped liquid waste stream floating around it. That certainly helped. Even though some nights I still dream of walking down a dark hall and into a murky pool where I end up being attacked by a girl's corpse. Every time I have this nightmare, her cold touch feels so real, and her blue, clouded eyes force cold sweat to run down my skin. One thing is for sure, while I don't know what happened in those catacombs, I will admit this much. I'm afraid of the arcane darkness that dwells just beneath our world. My mom used to be a huge prankster, with emphasis on the used to be. She has slowed down since turning 50. Not that she is a boring mother now, far from it. But she is less dedicated to pranking me or anyone else as she was years ago. One day when I was 15, I came home from school and looked at the mailbox. Inside was an envelope, a blank one. It wasn't signed, there was no stamp, nothing. Simply a pure white envelope. I opened the envelope and read the letter inside. Hey, little brother. It's been a while. In fact, the last time I have seen you, you were just 2 years old. By the way, it's your older sister. Shocking, right? I hope Mum told you about me. This introduction weirded me out. But looking at the childlike handwriting of the letter, I assumed it was my mom trying to pull a fast one. So I kept on reading. I was honestly hoping for some funny twist at the end of the letter or something. Hey, I'm sure you've grown a lot and changed. I just hope you still remember me and all our moments together from your childhood. We had done so many things together before I left you and our parents. At this point, it started feeling weird. Mom and Dad divorced when I was 3 or 4. She never spoke about Dad. She wasn't happy whenever someone mentioned him around her. He paid child support, and Mom always worked her ass off, so I never had anything missing in my life. I thought Mom was pulling one of those darker pranks she would do every once in a while, like pretending she broke both of her legs one time before springing up into a dance just before I lost my mind. I kept on reading. If you don't remember, allow me to remind you. I was there when you walked for the first time. I was there when you said Mama for the first time. All these big moments, I was there. I also tried forcing you to play with my dolls, but you were having none of it. It was such a mess. I'm sorry about that, and I hope you're not mad. Anyway, little bro, I'm glad to say that I finally know where you're living. The new house looks gorgeous. Believe me, I'm dying to see you all again. See you soon. I love you. Ava. There wasn't even a joke at the end of it, just a weird old letter about some crap that made no sense. I felt disappointed in my mother's comical abilities for the first and only time at that moment. Walking inside, I heard Mom in our kitchen. She was talking on the phone. She smiled and waved at me once she saw me come in. I waited for her to finish the call. Once she did, I dropped the letter onto the table and said, "Haha, very funny, Mum." "Huh? What's that?" she asked, seemingly genuinely unaware of the letter's existence. "You wrote this letter, didn't you? What was it about my sister?" "Eva, you're creative, Mom, that's for sure," I said, walking out of the kitchen. "What?" she questioned, genuine surprise in her tone. "Come on, Mom cut the act. You wrote this thing, didn't you?" I said, turning to face her once more. "No, I didn't." She picked up the letter and started reading it. Her eyes widened with genuine fear, and she started mumbling to herself. "Mom," I said. She just stood there, clutching at that piece of paper, mumbling to herself. Her eyes were wandering wildly across the text. "Mom," I called again. She was in a trance of sorts, completely fixated on that letter. "Mom, are you all right?" She mumbled something, slowly shifting her eyes to look at me. "Huh, I can't understand what you're Eva, my little girl, my poor little girl. The fire." "What the hell, Mom?" "My girl, she died when you were 3. She died in a fire." It hit me, a whole whirlwind of emotions that I couldn't even fully comprehend. My mom grabbed her phone once again and started dialing something. I just stood there trying to digest what I had just learned. It was so strange. There was a moment of doubt. I thought once again my mum was just playing a trick on me. A prank, and then she said it. "Go get your stuff, we're going to Grandma's." It finally sank in. I tried asking, but Mom had no clue what this whole situation was about. She didn't know where the letter came from. She kept saying she felt like we just had to get out. A feeling she described as having a cold hand clutch at her heart and press on it again and again. We moved to my grandmother's. On the way there, I learned that I had a sister 10 years older than me. My sister Eva died falling into a pyre during a local festival. The death of Ava caused a local uproar, and it was all over the local media. It also tore my family apart. The death of my sister led to the divorce of my parents. No wonder Mom never spoke about it. Our house caught on fire the next morning. No one knows what happened. I do remember hearing one of the neighbors talking to my mom about it at some point. He swore he saw a silhouette girl running around the house, moving about in a fit of pure rage the night we left.